The November wind cut through 12-year-old Marcus Thompson's thin jacket like 1,000 tiny knives. He'd been walking for hours along the forgotten backroads of rural Montana, far from the group home he'd run from 3 days ago. His sneakers, worn through at the soles, squelched with each step through the half-frozen mud. The sky above had turned from grey to charcoal, and soon it would be completely dark. Marcus hugged himself tighter, his fingers numb despite being tucked under his armpits. He should have stayed. He knew that now. But after 6 months of listening to Derek and his friends mock him every night, after having his few possessions stolen or destroyed, after the counselors dismissed his complaints with tired sighs and empty promises, something inside him had snapped. "Just make it to Aunt Linda's," he whispered through chattering teeth, his breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. His aunt lived somewhere near Kalispell, or at least she had 4 years ago, before his mother died and the system swallowed him whole. He wasn't even sure she'd want to see him, but she was the only family he had left. The forest pressed in on both sides of the narrow road, dense walls of pine and spruce that seemed to absorb what little light remained. Marcus's stomach growled painfully. He'd finished the last of the crackers he'd stolen from the group home's kitchen yesterday morning. Since then, there'd been nothing but water from a creek and the growing weakness in his legs. A sound made him freeze. At first, he thought it was the wind moving through the trees, but then he heard it again, a low, pained whimpering coming from somewhere in the woods to his left. Marcus's heart hammered. Mountain lions, bears. He'd heard stories about what lived in these forests, creatures that could tear a kid apart without breaking stride. He started walking faster, his eyes locked on the darkening road ahead. The whimpering came again, closer now, followed by the sound of something moving through the underbrush. Marcus broke into a run, his worn sneakers slapping against the wet asphalt, his breath coming in ragged gasps that burned his lungs. Then he saw it. A dog emerged from the tree line about 20 feet ahead, limping badly on its left front leg. Even in the fading light, Marcus could see the animal was in rough shape. Its fur, what looked like it might have once been golden or tan, was matted with mud and something darker. Blood, Marcus realized with a jolt. The dog's leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, and a deep gash ran along its shoulder. Marcus stopped running. The dog stopped too, its eyes, intelligent and sad, fixed on him. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said softly, the way his mother had taught him to speak to animals when he was small. "You're hurt pretty bad, huh?" The dog whimpered again, but didn't move. It was a large animal, maybe a golden retriever, or a mix, though it was hard to tell under all the dirt and blood. Its ribs showed prominently through its coat. Like me, Marcus thought. Both of us running from something, both of us starving and hurt. Marcus took a careful step forward. He had nothing to offer the dog, no food or water, and no way to help with its injuries. But there was something in those eyes that held him there, something that felt almost like recognition, like the dog understood what it meant to be alone and scared and desperate. "I can't help you," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "I can barely help myself." The dog took a limping step toward him, then another. When it was close enough, it pressed its head against Marcus's leg, not threatening, just seeking contact. Marcus felt something break inside him. He dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around the trembling animal, burying his face in its dirty fur. "We're a pair, aren't we?" he whispered. They stayed like that for a long moment, a boy and a dog, both abandoned by the world, finding brief comfort in each other's warmth. Then the dog pulled away and looked up at Marcus. It turned its head toward the forest, whimpered once, and began limping back into the trees. "Wait," Marcus called. "Where are you going?" The dog paused, looked back at him, then continued into the woods. After a few feet, it stopped again and turned, as if waiting for him to follow. Marcus looked at the darkening road ahead, then at the wounded dog. Every logical part of his brain screamed at him to stay on the road, to keep moving toward Kalispell, toward some hope of finding his aunt. But there was something about the dog's behavior, something deliberate and almost purposeful about the way it was moving, the way it kept looking back at him. Besides, Marcus thought, what did he have to lose? He was already lost, already running out of time. At least with the dog, he wouldn't be completely alone. "Okay," he said, stepping off the road and into the forest. "I'm coming, but this better not be a mistake." The dog's tail gave a slight wag, the first sign of anything resembling happiness Marcus had seen from it. Then it turned and began leading him deeper into the woods, limping through the undergrowth with a determination that suggested it knew exactly where it was going. Marcus followed, branches catching at his clothes, the darkness closing in around them both. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, and the wind picked up, carrying with it the promise of snow. The forest was darker than any place Marcus had ever been. The canopy overhead blocked out even the faint starlight, leaving only the vaguest shapes visible. The thick trunks of pines, the low-hanging branches that grabbed at his face and clothes, the barely distinguishable form of the limping dog several feet ahead. "Hey, slow down," Marcus called, his voice sounding small and swallowed by the trees. His foot caught on a root, and he stumbled forward, barely catching himself against a tree trunk. The bark was rough and damp under his palms, and he could feel the cold seeping deeper into his bones. The dog stopped and looked back, its eyes catching what little light penetrated the darkness, reflecting it back like two small moons. It waited patiently while Marcus regained his footing, then continued forward at a slightly slower pace. Marcus had no idea how long they walked. Time seemed to lose meaning in the darkness, each minute stretching into what felt like an hour. His legs ached, his stomach cramped with hunger, and the cold had moved past uncomfortable into something approaching dangerous. He knew about hypothermia from a unit in science class, back when he'd still been in a regular school before the group home. He knew that when you stopped shivering, when the cold started to feel warm, that's when you were really in trouble. He wasn't there yet, but he could feel himself getting close. "Where are we going?" he asked the dog, not expecting an answer. "Because if this is just you wandering around lost, we're both going to freeze out here." The dog didn't respond, just kept moving through the underbrush with that strange, determined limp. Despite its obvious pain, despite the injury that must have been agony with every step, the animal moved with purpose. It knew where it was going. Marcus had to believe that, because the alternative, that he'd left the road to follow a confused, dying animal into the wilderness, was too terrifying to contemplate. The ground began to slope upward, and Marcus's breathing became labored as they climbed. His legs felt like lead weights, and twice he had to stop and lean against a tree, his vision swimming with exhaustion and cold. Each time, the dog stopped and waited, turning those sad, intelligent eyes back to him. "I'm coming," Marcus gasped. "Just give me a second." After what felt like hours, but was probably only 45 minutes, the trees began to thin. Marcus could see patches of sky above, dark blue now instead of black, with stars scattered across it like thrown dice. The dog's pace quickened, its tail beginning to wag despite its injuries. Then Marcus saw it. Through the remaining trees, barely visible in the starlight, stood a cabin. It was small, made of logs that had weathered to a dark grey, with a stone chimney rising from one side. The windows were dark, and the whole structure had an air of abandonment about it, like something left behind and forgotten. The dog moved toward it eagerly now, whimpering with what sounded like relief. It climbed the 3 wooden steps to the porch, each step clearly causing pain, and scratched at the door. Marcus hung back, suddenly uncertain. The cabin could be abandoned, or it could belong to someone who might not take kindly to a runaway kid showing up in the middle of the night. He'd heard stories about people who lived alone in the woods, people who'd left society behind for darker reasons. But what choice did he have? He was freezing, exhausted, and completely lost. Without shelter, he wouldn't survive the night. "Hello?" he called out, his voice weak and uncertain. "Is anyone there?" No response. No lights flickered on inside. The dog scratched at the door again, more insistently. Marcus climbed the steps slowly, testing each one before putting his full weight on it. The wood creaked but held. Up close, he could see that the cabin was old but not abandoned. There were no broken windows, no rotting boards, no vegetation growing up the sides. Someone had maintained this place, or at least had recently. He tried the door handle. Locked. Of course, he muttered. But there was a window to the left of the door, and when Marcus pressed his face to the glass, he could just make out the interior. A single room with a pot-bellied stove, a simple cot, a table and chairs, and shelves lined with supplies. His heart leaped. Food, warmth, shelter. The dog had collapsed on the porch, its strength finally giving out. It looked up at Marcus with pleading eyes, and Marcus understood. The animal had brought him here because it needed help, and so did he. Marcus looked around and found a small pile of firewood stacked neatly beside the door. He picked up one of the smaller logs, whispered an apology to whoever owned this place, and used it to break the window. The glass shattered with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet forest. Marcus froze, waiting for lights to flare, for angry shouts, for something, but there was only silence. Working quickly, he cleared the remaining shards from the frame and climbed through, dropping into the dark interior of the cabin. His hands found a lantern on the table, and after a moment of fumbling, he managed to light it with matches he found beside it. Warm light flooded the cabin, and Marcus took his first real look around. It was sparse but comfortable, clearly someone's hunting cabin or retreat. The pot-bellied stove sat cold and dark, but there was wood beside it and kindling in a box. The shelves held canned goods, a first aid kit, blankets, and other supplies. Marcus moved to the door and unlocked it, letting the injured dog inside. The animal limped in and collapsed immediately on the wooden floor, its breathing labored. "Okay," Marcus said, talking to the dog, to himself, to the empty cabin. "Okay, first things first. Fire, then food, then we figure out how to help you." He moved to the stove, his hands shaking from cold and exhaustion and the adrenaline of what he'd just done, breaking and entering. He'd crossed a line, but he was alive, and right now, that felt like enough. As he worked to build a fire, carefully arranging kindling and wood, the way a counselor at a summer camp had shown him years ago, Marcus tried not to think about whose cabin this was, or what would happen when they came back. The fire caught on Marcus's third try, small flames licking at the kindling before spreading to the larger pieces of wood. He'd never felt anything as wonderful as the heat that began radiating from that stove. He positioned himself in front of it, holding his numb hands toward the warmth, feeling the painful tingling as sensations slowly returned to his fingers. The dog lay where it had collapsed, watching Marcus with those intelligent eyes. Its breathing was steadier now that they were out of the cold, but Marcus could see the extent of its injuries in the lamplight. The gash on its shoulder was deep and crusted with dried blood. Its left front leg was definitely broken, swollen and bent at an angle that made Marcus's stomach turn. "Let me get warm, then I'll help you," Marcus promised. "I don't know much about fixing dogs, but I'll do what I can." Once he could feel his fingers again, Marcus explored the cabin more thoroughly. The supplies on the shelves were organized with military precision. Canned soups and vegetables, crackers in sealed tins, instant coffee, powdered milk, and even some chocolate bars. His mouth watered at the sight of it all. But something made him hesitate before tearing into the food. This wasn't an abandoned cabin. Someone cared for this place, maintained it, stocked it. What if they needed these supplies? What if they were coming back soon? His stomach growled so loudly that the dog's ears perked up. "I'll just take a little," Marcus said aloud, as if saying it made it less wrong. "I'll leave a note, explain everything, maybe offer to pay them back somehow." He selected a can of chicken noodle soup and opened it with the manual can opener hanging from a nail beside the shelves. The smell that rose from the can was like heaven. He found a pot, heated the soup on top of the stove, and drank it directly from the pot, too hungry to wait or care about manners. It was the best thing he'd ever tasted. When he'd finished, Marcus turned his attention to the dog. He'd noticed a first aid kit on the shelves, a large, professional-looking one, much more comprehensive than the basic kits he'd seen in the group home. He brought it down and opened it, finding bandages, antiseptic, pain medication, and various other supplies. "Okay, buddy," Marcus said, kneeling beside the dog. "This is probably going to hurt. I'm sorry." He started with the shoulder wound, carefully cleaning away the dried blood with water he'd heated on the stove and a clean cloth. The dog whimpered, but didn't snap or pull away, as if it understood Marcus was trying to help. The gash was deep but clean, no signs of infection that Marcus could see. He applied antiseptic. The dog yelped but stayed still, and then carefully bandaged the wound. The broken leg was beyond his ability to fix. The best he could do was stabilize it with strips of cloth wrapped carefully around it, trying not to cause more pain. He gave the dog some water in a bowl he found, and after a moment's hesitation, opened another can of soup and poured half of it into a second bowl for the animal. The dog ate slowly, carefully, and afterward looked at Marcus with what he could have sworn was gratitude. "You're welcome," Marcus said, finding himself smiling for the first time in days. "We make a good team, huh? Both of us beat up and lost, taking care of each other." He pulled one of the blankets from the shelf and wrapped it around himself, then pulled another down for the dog. The animal had curled up as close to the stove as it could get without touching it, and when Marcus spread the blanket over it, the dog's tail gave a small wag. Marcus sat back, the warmth of the fire, the food in his belly and the blanket around his shoulders, combining to create the first sense of safety he'd felt since running away. His eyelids grew heavy, and he was about to let himself drift off, when his eyes fell on something he hadn't noticed before. In the corner of the cabin, partially hidden behind the door, was a desk. On the desk was a laptop, closed and presumably off, and several framed photographs. Marcus's curiosity overcame his exhaustion. He walked over to the desk, the wooden floor creaking under his feet, and picked up the nearest photograph. It showed a man, probably in his 50s, with grey hair and a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. He was smiling, and beside him stood a golden retriever. Marcus's heart stopped. He looked at the dog, then back at the photo, then at the dog again. It was the same animal. He was sure of it. Same coloring, same distinctive white blaze on its chest, same intelligent eyes. The dog was watching him, and when their eyes met, it whimpered softly. Marcus picked up another photo. The same man, this time in some kind of military uniform, standing with a group of other soldiers. Another photo showed the man receiving a medal, his face serious and proud. A fourth photo was older, showing a younger version of the man with a woman and a small child, a family. Marcus's hands trembled as he set the photos down. This was someone's cabin, someone who'd served in the military, someone who had this dog. Where was he? Marcus looked around the cabin with new eyes, and that's when he noticed other details he'd missed. A thin layer of dust on the table, the cold stove that hadn't been used in weeks, maybe longer, the stillness and silence of a place that hadn't heard human voices in quite some time. His eyes fell on a calendar hanging beside the desk, and his blood ran cold. The last date that had been crossed off was nearly 3 months ago. "No," Marcus whispered. He moved back to the desk and, with shaking hands, opened the laptop. It powered on, still had battery, and the screen showed the desktop without requiring a password. There was a document open, left there as if the user had simply walked away intending to return in a moment. Marcus read the first few lines, and his eyes filled with tears. "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. My name is Robert James Fletcher, Captain U.S. Army, retired. I came to this cabin 3 months ago to think, to find some peace, to maybe find a reason to keep going. The nightmares have been bad lately, worse than they've been in years. The memories of Afghanistan, of the men I couldn't save, of all the things I've seen and done, they follow me everywhere. I'm taking Max, my dog, and we're going for a hike. If I don't come back, please know that I'm not running away. I'm just tired. So very tired. Max is a good dog. He deserves better than—" The entry ended there, mid-sentence, as if Captain Fletcher had been interrupted or simply couldn't continue. Marcus stepped back from the laptop, his mind reeling. He looked at the dog, Max, who was watching him with those sad, knowing eyes. "You went looking for him," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "That's how you got hurt. You've been looking for him this whole time." Max whimpered and laid his head on his paws. Marcus sank to the floor, his back against the desk, tears streaming down his face. He cried for Captain Fletcher, a man he'd never met but whose pain he somehow understood. He cried for Max, loyal and determined even when injured and starving. And he cried for himself, for his mother, for all the loss and loneliness that seemed to follow him everywhere. But beneath the grief, a thought was forming, a realization. Captain Fletcher had left this cabin 3 months ago. Max had gone looking for him, had been injured, had somehow survived in the wilderness all this time. And then Max had found Marcus on that road and brought him here. Why? Marcus looked around the cabin again, at the supplies, at the photographs, at the life of a man who'd served his country and then struggled to find peace, at all the things that had been left behind. "You brought me here for a reason," Marcus said to Max. "Didn't you? You needed help, but maybe I needed help too. Maybe we both needed to find this place." Max's tail thumped once against the floor. Marcus wiped his eyes and took a deep breath. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if he should report what he'd found, or if Captain Fletcher was still out there somewhere, or what would happen to Max, or to himself. But for now, in this moment, he knew one thing. He wasn't alone, and neither was Max. "Okay," Marcus said, moving back to the fire and pulling Max's blanket more securely around the dog. "Tomorrow we'll figure it out. Tomorrow we'll decide what to do. But tonight we're safe. Tonight we take care of each other." He lay down beside Max, sharing the warmth of the fire and the blankets, one hand resting gently on the dog's head. Outside, the November wind howled through the trees, and the first snow of winter began to fall. Inside the cabin, a boy and a dog who'd both been lost finally found something they'd been searching for, a moment of peace and the beginning of hope. Marcus woke to pale sunlight streaming through the cabin's windows and the smell of wood smoke. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Then Max shifted beside him, whimpering softly, and everything came flooding back. The forest, the cabin, Captain Fletcher's unfinished note. He sat up slowly, his body aching from sleeping on the hard floor. Max was awake, watching him with those expressive eyes. The dog's bandages were still in place, but Marcus could see he needed water and probably more food. "Morning, buddy," Marcus said softly, running his hand over Max's head. "How are you feeling?" Max's tail gave a weak wag. Marcus stood, wincing at the stiffness in his legs, and refilled Max's water bowl. He opened another can of food, beef stew this time, and split it between them. As they ate in companionable silence, Marcus's mind raced with possibilities. He could leave, take some supplies, get back to the road, continue trying to find his aunt. The cabin had everything he needed for the journey: food, a warmer jacket he'd spotted hanging by the door, even a flashlight with working batteries. But that would mean abandoning Max, who couldn't walk properly and certainly couldn't survive alone. And it would mean leaving Captain Fletcher's story unfinished, his fate unknown. Marcus walked back to the desk and read through more of the laptop's contents. There were other documents, letters that had never been sent, journal entries dating back months, even years. Captain Fletcher had been struggling with PTSD for a long time, Marcus learned. The nightmares, the guilt, the feeling of being disconnected from civilian life after 2 tours in Afghanistan. One entry, dated 2 weeks before Fletcher's last note, caught Marcus's attention. "Max is the only thing keeping me grounded some days. When the memories get too loud, when I can't sleep, when I look at my service pistol and think about how easy it would be, Max is there. He doesn't judge. He doesn't need me to explain. He just stays close and reminds me that someone in this world still needs me." Marcus felt his throat tighten. He understood that feeling more than he wanted to admit. The loneliness, the sense of not belonging anywhere, the weight of memories that wouldn't let go. He found a topographical map of the area tucked into a desk drawer. Captain Fletcher had marked several hiking trails in red pen, with notes about difficulty levels and scenic points. One trail was circled heavily with a notation, Eagle Point, 3.2 miles northeast, best view in the county. Good place to think. Marcus studied the map carefully. Eagle Point. That's probably where Fletcher had gone. The notation was dated the same day as the last calendar entry. He looked at Max, who was watching him with an intensity that suggested the dog understood they were at a decision point. "I think I know where he went," Marcus said. "But it's been 3 months, Max. 3 months in these mountains, in the cold." He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what 3 months meant. Still, something in Marcus refused to simply walk away. Captain Fletcher deserved better than to be left unknown and unfound. And Max, loyal Max who'd nearly died searching, deserved answers. Marcus made his decision. He spent the next hour preparing. He found a hiking backpack and filled it with supplies. Water bottles, canned food, matches, the first aid kit, the flashlight, and 2 emergency blankets he discovered in a closet. He put on the heavier jacket, which was too big but far warmer than his thin windbreaker. He found a pair of thick socks and doubled them up in his worn sneakers. The hardest part was Max. The dog couldn't make the journey, not with a broken leg and injured shoulder. Marcus made him as comfortable as possible, creating a nest of blankets near the stove, leaving out extra food and water, and leaving the door slightly ajar in case Max needed to go outside. "I'll be back," Marcus promised, kneeling beside the dog. "I'm going to find him, and then we'll figure out what happens next, for both of us." Max licked his hand, and Marcus had to blink back tears. The morning was cold but clear, with about 3 inches of snow covering the ground from the previous night. Marcus followed the map, heading northeast from the cabin. The trail was marked periodically with faded blue blazes on trees, and he moved as quickly as he dared, constantly checking the map and compass he'd found with it. The forest was different in daylight, still imposing, but beautiful in a harsh way. Massive pines stretched toward the pale sky, their branches heavy with snow. Marcus saw tracks in the fresh snow, deer, rabbit, and something larger that might have been elk. He tried not to think about what other animals might leave tracks. The hike was harder than he'd anticipated. The trail climbed steadily upward, and despite the cold, Marcus was soon sweating under the heavy jacket. His breath came in white puffs, and his legs burned with effort. But he pushed on, driven by a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in months. After nearly 2 hours of hiking, the trees began to thin. Marcus could see open sky ahead, and the ground leveled out onto what appeared to be a rocky outcropping. Eagle Point. His heart hammered as he approached. The view was indeed spectacular. Miles of forest-covered mountains, rolling away in every direction, with snow-capped peaks in the distance. Under different circumstances, Marcus might have stopped to appreciate the beauty. But his eyes were scanning the area for any sign of Captain Fletcher. He found him sitting against a large boulder, facing the view. Marcus's breath caught. Even from a distance, even covered with a light layer of snow, he could tell. Captain Fletcher hadn't made it back to his cabin. Marcus approached slowly, his hands shaking. Fletcher was exactly where he'd wanted to be, in the place he'd marked as the best view in the county. He was dressed in hiking gear, a small backpack beside him. His eyes were closed, his face peaceful. Marcus knelt in the snow a few feet away, his throat tight with emotion. He didn't know what he'd expected to find, but seeing Fletcher like this, choosing this place, this view, this peaceful end, was both heartbreaking and somehow fitting. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered. "I'm sorry you hurt so much. I'm sorry no one could help you find peace before this." The wind whispered through the pines, and for a long moment Marcus just sat there in the snow, keeping vigil with a man he'd never met, but felt connected to through shared pain and loneliness. Finally, Marcus stood. He couldn't leave Fletcher here, but he also couldn't carry him back alone. He would need help, real help. and that meant doing something Marcus had been avoiding since he ran away, reaching out to the authorities. But as he stood there, looking at Captain Fletcher's peaceful face and thinking about Max waiting in the cabin, Marcus realized something important. Fletcher's story didn't have to end here in silence and isolation, and neither did his own. Marcus pulled out the map and noted the exact location. Then he turned and began the hike back to the cabin, his mind already forming a plan. He would call for help. He would tell them about Fletcher and Max. And yes, they would find out about him, the runaway from the group home. But maybe that was okay. Maybe it was time to stop running. The hike back seemed shorter, or maybe Marcus was just moving faster, driven by purpose and determination. When he finally saw the cabin through the trees, relief washed over him. Max was at the window watching for him, and when Marcus pushed open the door, the dog's tail wagged despite his injuries. "I found him," Marcus said, dropping the backpack and kneeling beside Max. "He's at peace, Max. He didn't suffer. He watched the sunrise from the most beautiful place he knew, and he let go." Max whimpered and pressed his head against Marcus's chest. Marcus held the dog, both of them grieving for a man who'd served his country, who'd fought his demons as long as he could, and who'd loved his dog enough that the animal had searched for him for 3 months. "Okay," Marcus said finally, pulling back and wiping his eyes. "Now we make the call, and we do this right, for Fletcher, for you, and maybe for me too." He found a phone number posted on the wall, emergency services for the county. And for the first time since running away, Marcus Thompson reached out for help. The sheriff's deputy who arrived at the cabin 2 hours later was a woman in her 40s named Sandra Reyes. She came alone, her SUV carefully navigating the rough forest road that Marcus hadn't even known existed. When she knocked on the cabin door, Marcus's first instinct was to run, but Max's steady presence beside him kept him grounded. "Marcus Thompson!" she called through the door. Her voice was firm, but not unkind. "I'm Deputy Reyes. You called about Captain Fletcher?" Marcus opened the door slowly. Deputy Reyes took in the scene with experienced eyes. The broken window, the boy wrapped in an oversized jacket, the injured dog, the cabin that clearly wasn't his. "I broke in," Marcus said immediately, deciding honesty was his only option. "I was lost and freezing, and Max, the dog, led me here. I broke the window, I used the food and supplies. I know that's breaking and entering and theft, but I didn't know what else to do." Deputy Reyes studied him for a long moment, then her expression softened. "Let's start with Captain Fletcher. You said you found him." Marcus nodded and explained everything. How he'd found Max on the road, how the dog had led him to the cabin, what he'd discovered about Fletcher, and finally, his hike to Eagle Point. He showed her the location on the map. Reyes radioed for additional support, including search and rescue and the county coroner. Then she looked at Marcus again. "You hiked 3 miles into the mountains alone to find a man you'd never met." "Max deserved to know," Marcus said simply, "and Captain Fletcher deserved to be found, to be brought home, properly." Something shifted in Deputy Reyes's expression. "How old are you, son?" 12. "And where are your parents?" Marcus swallowed hard. "My mom died 4 years ago. I never knew my dad. I've been in a group home in Great Falls, but I ran away 3 days ago." "Why?" It was a simple question, but Marcus found himself unable to answer with simple words. Instead, he told her everything, about Derek and the bullying, about the counselors who didn't care, about his Aunt Linda who might not even remember him, about feeling invisible and worthless and completely alone. "Until I found Max," Marcus finished, "and then we weren't alone anymore. We were both hurt and lost, but we had each other." Deputy Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then she knelt down and examined Max's injuries. "You bandaged him yourself?" "I did my best. His leg is broken. He needs a real vet." "Yes, he does." She pulled out her phone and made another call, this one to a veterinary clinic in the nearest town. "They'll meet us there in an hour." "What about me?" Marcus asked, his voice small. "Are you arresting me? For breaking in?" Reyes looked around the cabin again. "Under normal circumstances, yes. Breaking and entering is a crime. But these aren't normal circumstances. You were in genuine danger, you took only what you needed to survive, and you didn't vandalize or steal unnecessarily. More importantly, you found Captain Fletcher. His family has been looking for him for 3 months. Marcus's head snapped up. He has family? A sister in Billings. She's been calling us every week, begging us to keep searching. We looked, but these mountains are vast, and we didn't know exactly where Fletcher had gone. You gave us that. She paused. You also took excellent care of his dog. That counts for something. Over the next few hours, the cabin became busy with activity. Search and rescue arrived, and Marcus showed them exactly where to find Fletcher. A veterinary technician came with a special stretcher for Max, carefully loading the injured dog for transport. And through it all, Deputy Reyes stayed close to Marcus, making sure he was fed, warm, and not treated like a criminal. "What happens now?" Marcus asked, as they prepared to leave the cabin. He'd helped clean up, replacing the supplies he'd used with careful notes about quantities, and had written a long letter to Fletcher's sister explaining everything. "Now, we get Max to the vet," Reyes said. "Then we need to deal with your situation. You're technically a runaway, which means I should return you to the group home." Marcus's heart sank. "I can't go back there. I can't." "I said should, not will," Reyes replied. "I've already contacted your caseworker and explained the situation. There are going to be some conversations about your placement. The group home you were at has had multiple complaints. Your situation is just one of many. They're under investigation." Hope flickered in Marcus's chest. "Really? Really? In the meantime, you'll need emergency foster placement. I've already called a family I know, the Hendersons. They're good people, experienced foster parents. They've agreed to take you temporarily while we sort everything out." "What about Max?" Marcus asked, looking toward the vehicle where the dog waited. "What happens to him?" "That depends on Captain Fletcher's sister. Max belonged to Robert. She'll have to decide what to do with him." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. After everything they'd been through together, the thought of being separated from Max was almost unbearable. Deputy Reyes must have seen his expression because she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Let's take things one step at a time. First, we get Max healthy, then we see what happens next." The veterinary clinic in the small town of Whitefish was warm and smelled of antiseptic and animals. Dr. Sarah Chen, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes, took Max immediately into the examination room. Marcus insisted on staying with him, and to his surprise, Deputy Reyes allowed it. Dr. Chen worked efficiently, murmuring softly to Max as she examined him. "The shoulder wound is actually healing well," she said. "Someone cleaned and bandaged it properly." She glanced at Marcus with approval. "Is his leg really broken?" Marcus asked. "Yes, but it's a clean break. With surgery and proper care, he should recover fully. He'll need to stay here for at least a week, maybe 2, depending on how he heals." "How much will that cost?" Marcus asked, thinking of the few dollars he had in his pocket. "We'll figure out the payment," Dr. Chen said gently. "Captain Fletcher was well known in this community. I think people will want to help Max." As Dr. Chen prepared Max for surgery, Marcus leaned close to the dog's head. "You're going to be okay," he whispered. "You're tough. You survived 3 months in those mountains. You can handle this." Max licked his hand, and Marcus had to turn away to hide his tears. Deputy Reyes drove Marcus to the Henderson home as evening fell. It was a modest ranch house on the outskirts of town, with a fenced yard and warm lights glowing in the windows. Tom and Marie Henderson met them at the door, a couple in their 50s, with weathered faces and genuine smiles. Marie immediately wrapped Marcus in a hug, as if she'd known him his whole life. "Come in, sweetheart," she said. "You must be exhausted. We've got dinner ready and a room all set up for you." The house was warm and smelled of cooking meat and fresh bread. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the normalcy of it. A real home, with family photos on the walls and comfortable furniture and the sound of a television playing somewhere. "Give him some space, Marie," Tom said gently, but he was smiling. "The boy's been through a lot." Deputy Reyes stayed for dinner, and over pot roast and mashed potatoes, Marcus found himself telling the story again. But this time, with the Hendersons' encouraging nods and Marie's occasional gasps of sympathy, it felt less like a confession and more like simply sharing something that had happened. "You're a brave young man," Tom said when Marcus finished. "Not everyone would have done what you did for that dog and for Captain Fletcher." "I just did what felt right," Marcus said quietly. "Exactly," Marie said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "That's what makes it brave." Later, after Deputy Reyes had left with promises to check in tomorrow, Marie showed Marcus to his room. It was simple but clean, with a comfortable bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the backyard. "The bathroom is next door," Marie said. "There are fresh towels, and Tom put out some clothes that should fit you. They belonged to our son before he went to college. Help yourself to anything you need." "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly, "for taking me in, for not treating me like a criminal." Marie's eyes filled with tears. She pulled Marcus into another hug, and this time he didn't pull away. "You're not a criminal, sweetheart," she said firmly. "You're a child who needed help and didn't know how to ask for it. That's not a crime. That's just being human." After Marie left, Marcus took a long, hot shower, the first one in days. He put on the borrowed clothes, which fit reasonably well, and climbed into the bed with its clean sheets and soft pillows. He should have fallen asleep immediately, but instead he lay awake, thinking about Max recovering from surgery, about Captain Fletcher's sister who was driving up from Billings tomorrow, about the uncertain future that stretched ahead. For the first time in a long time, though, that uncertainty didn't feel quite so terrifying. He wasn't alone anymore. He had people who were willing to help, who saw him as something other than a problem to be managed. And somewhere in this town, Max was healing, both of them getting a second chance. The next morning, Marcus woke to the smell of bacon and coffee. For a disorienting moment, he thought he was back in his mother's house before she got sick, when Saturday mornings meant pancakes and cartoons. Then reality settled back in, but it wasn't as harsh as he expected. He dressed in the borrowed clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt that were only slightly too big, and made his way to the kitchen. Marie was at the stove, and Tom sat at the table reading a newspaper. They both looked up and smiled when he entered. "Morning, Marcus," Tom said. "How'd you sleep?" "Good," Marcus admitted. "Really good, actually." "Sit down, sweetheart," Marie said, already loading a plate with scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast. "We have a busy day ahead." Over breakfast, Tom explained the plan. Deputy Reyes would pick them up mid-morning to go check on Max at the vet clinic. Then they had a meeting scheduled with Marcus's caseworker and a representative from Child Protective Services to discuss his situation. And finally, Captain Fletcher's sister, Patricia Fletcher Morrison, wanted to meet Marcus. "She doesn't have to," Marcus said quickly. "I mean, I'm the one who broke into her brother's cabin. She's probably angry." "Actually," Tom said gently, "Deputy Reyes said she specifically asked to meet you. She wants to thank you." The veterinary clinic was busy with morning appointments when they arrived. Dr. Chen met them in the waiting room, her face tired but smiling. "Max came through surgery beautifully," she said. "Would you like to see him?" Marcus nodded eagerly and followed Dr. Chen to the recovery area. Max was in a large kennel, his leg now properly set and wrapped in a blue cast. When he saw Marcus, his tail began wagging so hard his whole body moved. "Hey, buddy," Marcus said, opening the kennel door and kneeling beside the dog. Max immediately tried to stand, whimpering with excitement. "Easy, easy. You're supposed to rest." "He's been asking for you," Dr. Chen said. "Well, not in words, but every time someone walks by, he looks for you. Dogs know who saved them." Marcus spent 20 minutes with Max, just sitting beside him, petting him, talking softly about everything that had happened. It felt good to share it all with someone who couldn't judge, who just listened and occasionally licked his hand. "The surgery cost $1,500, Dr. Chen said when Marcus reluctantly prepared to leave. "But don't worry about it. When word got out about Captain Fletcher and what you did, several people in town called offering to help. The bill is already paid, and Max has a fund set up for any ongoing care he needs." Marcus felt his eyes burn with tears. People did that. For a dog they don't even know. For a soldier's dog, Dr. Chen corrected gently. And for a brave kid who did the right thing. This town takes care of its own, Marcus. And now that includes you and Max. Dulce, the meeting with the caseworker was less intimidating than Marcus feared. Jennifer Walsh was younger than he expected, maybe late 20s, with tired eyes that suggested she'd seen too much sadness in her job. But she listened to Marcus's story without interruption, occasionally jotting notes. "The group home you were in is being investigated," she confirmed. "We've received multiple complaints about inadequate supervision and bullying incidents that weren't addressed. You weren't the first kid to run away from there this year." "What does that mean for me?" Marcus asked. "It means you won't be going back there," Jennifer said firmly. "We're looking at other options. The Hendersons have agreed to keep you temporarily, and if things go well, we might be able to make that longer term. Would you like that?" Marcus glanced at Tom and Marie, who were sitting on either side of him. Marie squeezed his hand encouragingly. "Yes," Marcus said, "I would." "Good. There's also the matter of your aunt, Linda Ramirez, in Kalispell. I've tracked her down. She's remarried, has 2 children of her own, and she'd like to meet with you. She had no idea you'd been placed in the system. She thought your mother's lawyer was handling everything." "She wants to see me?" Marcus asked, hope and fear mixing in his chest. "She does. We'll set up a meeting soon. But Marcus, I want you to understand. Even if things don't work out with your aunt, you have options. You have people who want to help you. You're not alone anymore." Patricia Fletcher Morrison arrived at the Henderson house in the early afternoon. She was in her late 50s, with grey-streaked hair and her brother's weathered face. When she saw Marcus, her eyes immediately filled with tears. "You found him," she said, her voice breaking. "You brought my brother home." Marcus didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Patricia sat down in the Hendersons' living room, Marie bringing her tea that she didn't touch. For a long moment, she just looked at Marcus, and he shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "I'm sorry I broke into the cabin," Marcus said finally. "I know I shouldn't have, but I was freezing and Max was hurt and—" "Stop," Patricia said gently. "You have nothing to apologize for. You did what you needed to survive, and more importantly, you led us to Robert. Do you know what these past 3 months have been like? Not knowing, imagining every terrible possibility. You ended that. You gave me closure, gave me a chance to say goodbye properly." She pulled out a tissue and wiped her eyes. "Deputy Reyes told me everything about Max leading you to the cabin, about how you took care of him, about how you hiked to Eagle Point alone to find Robert. That took incredible courage." "Max did all the hard work," Marcus said. "He's the brave one. He looked for Captain Fletcher for 3 months. Even injured, he never gave up. Robert trained him well," Patricia said with a sad smile. "Max was Robert's lifeline after he came back from Afghanistan. When the nightmares got bad, when Robert felt like he was drowning, Max was there. That dog probably kept my brother alive for years longer than—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "I read some of his journal," Marcus admitted, "on the laptop. I'm sorry, I know that was private, but I needed to understand. He seemed like a good person who was just hurting." "He was," Patricia said. "He was the best person I knew. He saved lives in Afghanistan, earned medals, was respected by everyone who served with him. But he came home different. The VA tried to help, but it wasn't enough. He felt like he didn't belong anymore, like he was a burden." She looked directly at Marcus. "Did you understand that feeling? Is that why you ran away?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I felt invisible, like no one would care if I disappeared." "But you were wrong," Patricia said firmly. "Just like Robert was wrong. People care. Sometimes we just can't see it when we're in the darkness." They talked for over an hour. Patricia told Marcus stories about Robert, the brother who'd taught her to fish, who'd enlisted to serve his country, who'd come home changed but still fundamentally good. And Marcus found himself sharing more about his own life, about his mother, about the fear and loneliness that had driven him to run. Finally, Patricia reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "Robert's will was simple," she said. "He left the cabin to me, along with a small savings account, but there was a letter with it, instructions about what to do if anything happened to him." She opened the envelope and pulled out a handwritten note. "Listen to this. If I'm gone, make sure Max goes to someone who will love him the way he loved me, someone who understands loyalty and won't give up on him, someone who needs him as much as he needs them." Patricia looked at Marcus with tears streaming down her face. "I think my brother somehow knew. I think he knew Max would find exactly the right person." Marcus's heart hammered. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Max is yours, Marcus, if you want him." "If the Hendersons agreed to have a dog in the house." Tom and Marie exchanged a glance, then both smiled. "We'd be happy to have Max," Marie said. "This house could use a dog." Marcus couldn't speak. He could only nod, tears streaming down his own face, overwhelmed by the impossible gift he'd just been given. Patricia reached over and took his hand. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for finding my brother. Thank you for taking care of Max. And thank you for being brave enough to ask for help. I think Robert would have been proud to know you." That evening, after Patricia had left and Marcus had called the vet clinic to tell Max the news, Dr. Chen promised to relay the message. Marcus sat on the back porch with Tom. The older man handed him a cup of hot chocolate and sat beside him in comfortable silence. "You know," Tom said eventually, "life has a funny way of bringing people together when they need each other most. You needed shelter, and you found Fletcher's cabin. Max needed help, and he found you. The Hendersons needed someone to care for, and here you are. Do you think things happen for a reason?" Marcus asked. Tom considered this. "I think things happen, and then we find the reasons in them. You didn't stumble into that cabin by accident. You followed a wounded dog who refused to give up. That wasn't fate. That was choice. Yours and Max's." Marcus thought about this. About all the choices that had led him here, running away, following Max, deciding to search for Fletcher, calling for help. Each one could have gone differently. "I'm glad I made the choices I did," Marcus said finally. "So am I, son," Tom said, putting an arm around his shoulders. "So am I." 2 weeks passed in a blur of doctor appointments, meetings with social workers, and daily visits to see Max at the vet clinic. Marcus settled into life with the Hendersons more easily than he'd expected. Marie's warmth and Tom's steady presence created a sense of safety he hadn't felt since his mother was alive. They didn't push him to talk about his feelings, but they were always there when he needed them. The meeting with Aunt Linda was scheduled for a Saturday morning at a neutral location, a family counseling center in Kalispell. Marcus was nervous as Tom drove him there, his hands sweating despite the cold December air. "Whatever happens," Tom said as they pulled into the parking lot, "you still have a place with us. This isn't about replacing anyone. It's just about building connections." Linda Ramirez was waiting in the reception area. She was younger than Marcus remembered, maybe late 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and his mother's eyes. When she saw Marcus, she stood abruptly, her hand flying to her mouth. "Marcus," she breathed. "Oh my God, you look so much like Elena." The meeting was supervised by a counselor, a gentle woman named Dr. Patel, who facilitated the conversation carefully. At first, things were awkward. Linda explained through tears how she'd lost touch with Marcus's mother during her illness, how she'd been dealing with her own divorce and hadn't known Elena had passed until months later. "I called the number I had, but it was disconnected," Linda said. "I reached out to the hospital, but they couldn't tell me anything due to privacy laws. I thought maybe Elena's lawyer had arranged for you to stay with your father's family. I never imagined—" She couldn't finish. "I thought you didn't want me," Marcus admitted quietly. "Mom used to talk about you, about how close you were. When no one came after she died, I thought it meant you'd forgotten about us." Linda reached across the table and took his hands. "Never. I loved your mother. She was my big sister, my hero, and I loved you. I failed you by not trying harder to find you, and I'm so sorry." They talked for over an hour, sharing memories of Marcus's mother, laughing over stories Marcus had forgotten, crying over the years they'd lost. Linda showed him pictures of her kids, his cousins, and talked about the small house she'd bought in Kalispell after remarrying. "I want you in my life," Linda said firmly. "I know I can't erase the past 4 years, can't make up for not being there, but I want to try. Whatever that looks like, visits, phone calls, maybe you could come stay with us sometimes," Dr. Patel interjected gently. "Marcus is currently in a stable foster placement with the Hendersons. Any changes would need to be gradual and in his best interest." "I understand," Linda said quickly. "I'm not trying to disrupt anything. I just want him to know he has family, that he's not alone." Marcus looked at this woman who shared his mother's features, who'd loved the same person he'd lost, who'd been searching for him in her own way. He thought about the Hendersons, about Max, about Deputy Reyes and Patricia Fletcher Morrison, and all the people who'd shown up for him when he needed them most. "Could we start with visits?" Marcus asked. "Like, maybe I could come to your house sometimes, meet your family, but still live with the Hendersons?" Linda's face lit up. "Yes, absolutely yes. Whatever you're comfortable with." They made plans before leaving. Dinner the following weekend, with the Hendersons invited too. Linda gave Marcus her phone number and made him promise to call any time, day or night, if he needed anything. As Tom drove Marcus back to Whitefish, the boy felt something shift inside him. The hollow ache that had lived in his chest since his mother died hadn't disappeared, but it felt smaller somehow, less consuming. "How do you feel?" Tom asked. Confused, Marcus admitted, but good confused, like maybe things are actually going to be okay. Tom smiled. That's a good place to start. The next day, Dr. Chen called with the news Marcus had been waiting for. Max was ready to come home. The entire Henderson family, Tom, Marie, and Marcus, went to pick him up. Max was waiting in the lobby, his tail wagging frantically when he saw Marcus. The cast on his leg was bright blue, and he wore a cone around his neck to keep him from bothering his healing shoulder, but his eyes were bright and alert. "He's doing fantastic," Dr. Chen said. "The leg is healing perfectly, and the shoulder wound has closed completely. He'll need to keep the cast on for another 4 weeks, and he should avoid running or jumping during that time. But overall, he's a remarkably resilient dog." Marcus knelt beside Max, and the dog immediately pressed against him, making happy whimpering sounds. "I told you we'd be okay," Marcus whispered. "Both of us." The ride home was filled with Max's contented panting from the back seat, where Marcus sat with his arm around the dog. Marie had prepared a special welcome, a new dog bed in Marcus's room, bowls with Max's name on them, and even some treats she'd researched were good for healing dogs. That first night, with Max settled on his new bed and Marcus lying in his own, the boy felt something he hadn't experienced in years, complete contentment. He wasn't in a group home where he had to sleep with one eye open. He wasn't on the run, freezing and starving. He was in a real home, with people who cared about him and a dog who'd led him here. "Thank you," Marcus said softly to Max, "for not giving up, for finding me when I was lost." Max's tail thumped against his bed, and in the darkness, Marcus smiled. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Marcus attended the local middle school, where he was behind in some subjects but determined to catch up. Marie helped him with homework every evening, patient and encouraging. Tom taught him practical skills, how to chop wood, how to change a tire, how to fix things around the house, things a father might have taught him. He visited Aunt Linda twice, meeting his cousins, a boy of 9 and a girl of 7, who were shy at first but quickly warmed to him. Linda's husband Carlos was kind and didn't try too hard, just let Marcus find his own place in their family dynamic. Deputy Reyes stopped by regularly, checking in on him officially, but also bringing Max special treats and staying for Marie's coffee. She told Marcus that the investigation into the group home had resulted in several staff dismissals and policy changes. Other kids who'd reported problems were being listened to now. Patricia Fletcher Morrison visited once more before Christmas, bringing boxes of Robert's belongings she thought Marcus might want, books on wilderness survival, camping gear, and a framed photo of Robert and Max together. "Robert would have liked you," she said. "You remind me of him when he was young, brave and kind, even when the world hasn't been kind back." Christmas at the Hendersons was unlike anything Marcus had experienced. Marie went all out with decorations. Tom brought home a massive tree, and they spent an evening decorating it together while Max supervised from his bed, his tail wagging whenever anyone addressed him. On Christmas morning, Marcus woke to find presents under the tree with his name on them. Real presents, thoughtfully chosen. Warm clothes that actually fit, books he'd mentioned wanting to read, a new winter coat, and from Tom and Marie, a framed photo of Marcus and Max from the day they'd brought the dog home, both of them smiling. "We want you to know this is your home," Marie said, her eyes wet with tears, "for as long as you need it. And we're going to petition to become your permanent foster family, if that's what you want." Marcus couldn't speak. He just nodded and let Marie pull him into a hug while Tom wrapped his arms around both of them. That afternoon, they visited Robert Fletcher's grave. Patricia had arranged for a proper military burial, and the headstone was simple but dignified. Marcus laid flowers there, Marie's idea, and stood for a long moment in silence. "I'm taking care of Max," Marcus said to the headstone, "and people are taking care of me. I think we're all going to be okay. Thank you for leaving the cabin stocked. You saved my life, even though you didn't know it." The wind whispered through the cemetery trees, and Marcus chose to believe it was an answer. Spring came to Montana with a rush of color and warmth that Marcus had never fully appreciated before. The snow melted, revealing green grass and wildflowers. Max's cast came off in late February, and by March he was running again. Not full speed yet, but enough that his joy was obvious. Marcus's caseworker Jennifer visited on a warm April afternoon with news. The Hendersons' petition for permanent foster care had been approved. Marcus could stay with them until he aged out of the system, and there was even discussion about possible adoption if everyone agreed that's what they wanted. "How do you feel about that?" Jennifer asked. Marcus looked around the Henderson home, at the photos on the wall that now included him, at Max sleeping in a patch of sunlight, at Marie humming in the kitchen while she prepared dinner, at Tom's reading glasses left on the side table. "I feel like I'm already home," Marcus said simply. School had become easier too. He'd made friends, cautiously at first, but real friendships nonetheless. His teachers, who knew his story, were supportive without being pitying. He'd even joined the school's hiking club, where his knowledge of the wilderness, learned from desperate experience and Captain Fletcher's books, made him something of an expert. One Saturday in May, Deputy Reyes organized something special. She'd contacted the local news, and they wanted to do a story about Marcus and Max. Not about the tragedy of Captain Fletcher, but about the connection between a boy and a dog, about resilience and hope. The interview took place at Eagle Point, where Marcus had found Robert Fletcher. It was beautiful now, with spring flowers blooming among the rocks and birds singing in the surrounding trees. The view was just as spectacular as it had been that cold November day, but now it felt less like a place of endings and more like a place of remembrance. "Why did you follow Max into the woods that night?" the reporter asked. Marcus thought about it carefully. "Because I saw something in him that reminded me of myself. We were both hurt and lost and scared, but we were also both fighting to survive. I couldn't leave him alone, and as it turned out, he couldn't leave me alone either." "What would you say to other kids who feel lost or alone?" Marcus looked at Max, who sat beside him with his tongue hanging out happily. "I'd say that asking for help isn't weakness. It's actually the bravest thing you can do. And I'd say that sometimes the people or animals who save us are the ones who need saving too. We helped each other. That's what got us through." The story aired 2 weeks later, and the response was overwhelming. Letters came from all over Montana, from kids who'd felt alone, from veterans struggling with PTSD, from people who simply wanted to say that Marcus's story had touched them. One letter came from a group home in Billings, from Derek, the boy who'd bullied Marcus. It was short and awkward, but it was an apology, a real one. Marcus showed it to Tom, unsure how to respond. "That took courage," Tom said. "Not as much courage as you showed, but still, maybe write him back. Tell him you accept his apology. You don't have to forget what happened, but forgiveness, that's something you do for yourself, not for him." Marcus did write back, keeping it brief but genuine, and in doing so, he felt another piece of his past pain loosen its grip. The first anniversary of finding Max and the cabin came in November. Marcus, now 13 and taller by several inches, hiked to Eagle Point with Tom, Marie, Max, and Aunt Linda's family. Patricia Fletcher Morrison met them there, along with Deputy Reyes and Dr. Chen. They didn't make speeches or create a formal memorial. Instead, they simply stood together, looking out at the same view Robert Fletcher had seen in his final moments, and shared stories about Robert, about the rescue, about the year that had changed all of them. "Robert's death broke my heart," Patricia said, "but somehow through that brokenness something beautiful happened. Marcus and Max found each other. A boy who needed a home got one. A dog who needed purpose got it. And all of us, we became a community. We became connected." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Marcus felt Max press against his leg. The dog looked up at him with those same intelligent eyes that had found him on a dark road a year ago. "We made it, buddy," Marcus whispered, running his hand over Max's head. "We both made it home." That night, back at the Henderson house, Marcus sat at the desk in his room not just a temporary space, and pulled out the journal Marie had given him for his birthday. He'd been writing in it regularly, working through his feelings with Dr. Patel's encouragement. He wrote about the anniversary, about how far he'd come, about the family he'd found, and the family he'd rebuilt with Aunt Linda. He wrote about school and friends and plans for the future. Possibly veterinary medicine, inspired by Dr. Chen, or maybe social work like Jennifer, helping other kids who felt as lost as he once had. But mostly, he wrote about gratitude for Max, who'd refused to give up, for the Hendersons, who'd opened their home and hearts, for Captain Fletcher, who'd left behind not just a cabin and supplies, but a dog who knew how to find someone who needed saving. For all the people who'd shown up when he needed them most. Marcus closed the journal and looked at Max, who was stretched out on his bed, snoring softly. The dog's fur had grown back thick and healthy, his scars barely visible now. He looked content, safe, loved. "Good night, Max," Marcus said, turning off the light. In the darkness, he heard Max's tail thump once against the bed, and Marcus smiled. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the trees, but inside, everything was warm and safe and right. He wasn't a lost kid anymore. He was just Marcus Thompson, foster son, nephew, friend, student, and the proud companion of a dog named Max. He was home, and that was everything. If you've made it this far, don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next stories. Leave us a comment, letting us know where in the world you're watching from. Your support inspires us to keep creating content like this. Thank you for being here with us.